I want to welcome all of you to the COP29 panel at this wonderful CFTJ forum. I'm going to start, we're going to have somewhat of an unusual discussion here because we're not going to be, it's going to be far more of a dialogue rather than a lecture. It's going to be, what we're going to have is far more of a dialogue rather than a lecture, and that's by design. This is something that the participants discuss between themselves. We're not professors and you're not our students, so we'll approach it in that manner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an introduction of our distinguished panel. I'm going to lay the groundwork of some of the background where this COP29 comes from, because a lot of people don't know where it comes from and why it's important. And then we will start our conversation, and then we'll go from there, sometimes with direct questions and sometimes with just general comments from each person. I'm going to start with the introduction, and starting from the other end, our friend Senator Anthony Portantino. And you know, usually I'm like the one political operative that's more crass words to use it with a lot of academics and very distinguished people. In this case, there's two of us, so thanks for being here, Anthony, all the way from Southern California. Let me give you Anthony's bio. State Senator Anthony Portantino serves California's 25th Senate District and is a recognized leader in the Armenian diaspora for his advocacy of genocide recognition and long-standing ties to the Armenian community. Senator Portantino co-authored legislation to teach the Armenian genocide in California public schools, secured nearly $20 million in state funding for the Armenian American Museum in Glendale. Over his tenure, Senator Portantino has supported Armenian language programs in public schools, fostered international cooperation between California and Armenia as the chair of the California State Senate Select Committee on California and Armenia, and Artsakh Mutual Trade, Art Culture Exchange, and has led multiple delegations to Armenia and Artsakh. Next to our, yes, please. Next to Senator Portantino, we have our distinguished guest from Atlanta, if I'm not mistaken, Hrair Balian. Hrair Balian has been working as a peace-building practitioner since 1990, and his current focus being the South Caucasus, regarding which he's writing a book, Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. Previously, Balian has served as leadership positions at the UN, OSCE, NGOs, including the International Crisis Group, and most notably the Carter Center. He has also worked on conflict transformations, elections, and human rights in the Balkans, Eastern Europe, North and South Caucasus, Central Asia, Middle East, and Asia. Balian has taught graduate courses in conflict resolution, negotiations, and mediation. He holds a Juris Doctor's degree from 1985 and a Doctorate of Law from 2009. Then we go to our distinguished favorite think tanker from Washington, D.C., Virginia to be exact, or Maryland, which one? Maryland. Mr. Michael Rubin. He's a director of policy analysis at the Middle East Forum and a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, one of the leading think tanks in Washington, D.C. He's the author of several books about various aspects of Middle East politics and more than 2,500 op-eds and published essays. Boy, that's a lot. Rubin has taught at Yale University, Johns Hopkins University, and 3 universities in northern Iraq, which I know he has a special affinity for. He previously also deployed U.S. military units, both the Marines, Navy SEALs, and the FBI stationed in the Middle East and Africa. Dr. Rubin holds a PhD in history from Yale University and has testified before the U.S. Congress dozens of times. I don't know how glad you are about that. Thank you for doing this. Last but not least, our very distinguished guest from the great city of Paris, Anouch Toranian, currently serves as the deputy mayor of the city of Paris. Her career spanned roles in various government bodies, including the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and she has run her own public relations firm since 2015. She's fluent in Armenian, English, French, and Spanish. Mayor Toranian has deep connections to the Armenian community, have been on the administrative councils of Journée Arménie de France, France, and the Council de Coordination, the Armenia de France, Mayor Toranian, directed in the French branch of the Armenian General Benevolent Union, AGBU, starting in 2018. She holds a Master's in International Relations from Pantheon Associates University and another public administration from the Paris Institute of Political Studies. Now that we're done with that, let's move on to how did COP29 get too long? In short, essentially political blackmail, because of the way the UN was set up and the way COPs are divided. This could only go to two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, and essentially the Azeris blackmailed Armenia and the rest of the world in exchange for 30 prisoners that they had no business holding as part of the so-called peace process. So this is how this COP event actually ended up in a place that it has no business being involved in. I think none of this happens in a vacuum. I think we need to understand these big news going on, or the supposed so-called peace negotiations, when in reality they're really not likely to lead anywhere. For the most part, because the regime in Baku, who will be holding this event, has absolutely no intention of having peace, because peace does not serve its interest of keeping power in this totalitarian system and the state that they run. You might want to ask why. Why is this? We need to understand why this COP29 event is important for the regime in Baku. And obviously, this is directly related to what happened last year, which was the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. And it is something that obviously is designed to take the attention from that international crime and put it on something that is far more shiny and positive, which is dealing with climate change. And we just had this very interesting exchange with Mr. Rubin, with both of us came to the same line, but I'm going to beat him to it because I'm the moderator, which is there's a great analogy with this and the Berlin Olympics, in which a very horrid regime went on to improve its image to the world by running a very good Olympics program. And interestingly enough, when I was looking it up, the Nuremberg laws, which were the beginning, this is essentially where the Holocaust started, were enacted in September of the previous year. The analogies are quite eerie, if you ask me. I think this also leads to another thing, which is that the regime is very interested and obsessed with the legitimization. Այս ռեժիմը իրապես սևեռված է օրինականացման վրա, այսինքն այն ամենը ինչ արել է փորձում է օրինականացնել, նորմալացնել, այսինքն դա սովորաբար պետք է տրվեր ինչ-որ երկրի մի առաջնորդով, ով նորմալ է, այլ ոչ թե գանգստերին, որ երկիրը կառավարում է Կորլեոնեի ընտանիքի ավանդույթների համապատասխան։ Եթե նայենք what they do not want, we know what they want. What they do not want is they don't want to become Belarus, they do not want to become Russia, they want to be able to enjoy the wealth that is stolen, to be invited to the Berlin Conference, to be invited to events in Switzerland, and he cannot become an international pariah. And what he fears is actually an opening for everyone who's interested in a better world in this case. When you're really looking at what is this event for, and it's, COP29 in and of itself, frankly, it's just another event, and it's just another tool, and we have to see every event, every tool in the system, that we have a system that is incorrigible. Frankly, you're not going to get anything done. What you're really looking at is, what is it that you need to do to delegitimize the regime, to marginalize it, and to the greatest extent, criminalize the regime. These 3 points. How do we use COP29? Which aspect do we use to achieve these 3 things? Is it the right of return? Is it freeing the POWs? Or is it preventing future aggression against Armenia? Who wants to take this?
ռազմագերին վերադարձնելու մասին, ապագա ագրեսիան Հայաստանի նկատմամբ կանխելու համար եւ այլն։ Ով կցանկանա պատասխանել, ես որոշեմ, լավ, Michael, դու։
I may do the Washington thing. I appreciate your questions, and I'm going to answer the one that wasn't asked. The only point, I mean, I'm kind of curious to hear, as we look at COP29, I'm not sure, as much as we want to embarrass use it as an opportunity to embarrass the Azerbaijani government, whether that is actually going to work in the long term. When we were talking about the Berlin 1936 Olympics before, we often in the United States think back to Jesse Owens and his 4 gold medals, but while we look at that as delegitimizing Hitler's racial ideology, it didn't stop the Holocaust. And when we look at what happened with Qatar and FIFA, with regard to migrant labor rights, human rights, other issues, I think talking to the Qataris, they believe they still had a net benefit from hosting the World Cup on the world stage. That said, there are opportunities, and I'll just turn the floor back. The fact of the matter is, with Artsakh under Azerbaijani occupation, as it's been reconquered, as it's been ethnically cleansed, that was always the diversion which Ilham Aliyev used to distract from his own failings. And God knows there's a lot of failings inside Azerbaijan, and for those of you who have had the ability to travel there, it's something that is often whispered in the taxis, whispered on the streets, whispered at the universities. There's a real fear. That fear is only heightened right now under Ilham Aliyev, simply within Ilham Aliyev, because he's desperately looking for someone else to distract. The November COP29 is a temporary diversion. But as Azeris start talking about their economy, as they start talking about the economic failings, I mean, Azerbaijan is a petrostate. But if you look at IMF and World Bank statistics, its per capita income is less than that of Armenia, which suggests that as rich as people like the Aliyevs are, the poorer society is actually much larger than Armenia. Armenia is much more equitable in the division of its economics. The point is that while we can try to embarrass and heighten questions about human rights, in the long term, I'm kind of wondering how, what strategies beyond COP29 Ilham Aliyev is going to use to survive. But if I may just, as we start the conversation, when it comes to Anouch, you were going to explain the logic behind boycotting COP29 when it comes to the mayor. I should shout the French ambassador, Olivier, here has become famous for his moral clarity. The French government, unlike the United States government, hasn't been afraid to speak with moral clarity in regard to Armenia and Azerbaijan, to the point where the French ambassador in Baku has become basically persona non grata. I'd be curious about the logic of the boycott and whether you think the French policy is working, and if I may, what lessons the rest of the world can have from the French policy. And for an American conservative to say this about France, it really is remarkable.
Remarkable. And Michael, you're not just a panelist, you're also the moderator, so thank you. I'll take it. Listen, I wanted free form, and I'm getting what I wanted. So, Mayor Toranian, please answer Michael's question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say that I'm really glad to be here in Yerevan. It's something, and I want to congratulate all the organizers. I think it's a great opportunity to gather and to talk about this in Yerevan. It's particularly important. The mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, on behalf of whom I'm speaking today, asked me to thank you, and and for giving me the opportunity to expose her stand on Baku hosting the next COP. As you said, Mayor Hidalgo, who is in this instance is supported by elected officials from across the political spectrum of the City Council, wants to make it crystal clear that she will boycott COP29. This means that no deputy mayor will attend and no expert from the Parisian administration will make it to Baku either. I want here not to be mistaken. The fact that the mayor of Paris does boycott the COP29 doesn't mean that it's not because it will take place in an oil and gas producing country. Mayor Hidalgo attended COP in Abu Dhabi in order to present her agenda for gas-producing emission in our city, and she believes in talking with the oil-producing country in order to advance the goals of the 2015 Paris Agreement on climate change. The reason why she will not attend is political, is a symbol of support for Armenia and Armenians, as well as a protest against the abuse of human rights by the Aliyev regime. This stand is public, and the mayor has taken her decision in September 2023 after returning actually from Armenia. When it emerged as a possibility that Azerbaijan could host COP29, the Lachin corridor has already been blocked in gross violation of international and humanitarian law, and by the way, under the false argument that so-called environmental activists occupied the place. Mayor Hidalgo, who is a lifelong supporter of Armenia and Armenians, is also a strong supporter of the right of the people of Artsakh to remain in their ancestral country. Therefore, in 2020, she asked our city council to pass a resolution to the effect that the French government recognized Artsakh as an independent country. She also got the support of an overwhelming transpartisan majority in the city council when it came to voting humanitarian aid to both Armenia and the displaced citizens of Artsakh during the 44 days war and after the illegal annexation of Artsakh 1 year ago. In addition, with the help of AGBU and other representative bodies of the Armenian community in France, she decided to travel to Armenia at the very end of August 2023 in order to deliver 19 trucks full of first aid kits to the population of Artsakh, and the goal was to have Azerbaijan accept that the convoy crossed the corridor, but the authorities of Baku refused, so the humanitarian aid was stockpiled in Goris and later on delivered to the Artsakh refugees in Armenia. Mayor Hidalgo at this time did not travel alone. She wanted the humanitarian operation to be transpartisan, as I said, so she brought along with her mayors and members of parliament from both the left and the conservative right, such as the Green Party mayor of Strasbourg, as well as Xavier Bertrand, who is the president of the North region in France, Bruno Retailleau, François-Xavier Bellamy, member of parliament, three high-profile leaders from the French Republican, who are at the front of the support for Armenia and Artsakh. The message sent by our mayor and the delegation was simple, as explained with solidly grounded arguments by the former ICC prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo. Azerbaijan was about to commit a genocide against the population of Artsakh, not only ethnic cleansing, but genocide by hunger. That was the real intent of the blockade, and after Artsakh was finally defeated and its legally elected leaders were deported to Baku, where they are still arbitrarily detained, she decided to convene a press conference in Paris on the topic of Artsakh. So this conference took place on November 7, 2023, at the Paris City Hall with Mr. Moreno Ocampo and political leaders from both the left and the conservative right speaking. And it is on this occasion that the mayor of Paris officially announced she would boycott COP29. On December 7, she, with other high-rank elected officials, published a statement in the French press expressing their intent to boycott the COP29. So the mayor's decision to boycott was taken because first, the COP29, in her opinion, cannot take place in the capital country, a capital city of a country with a plan, which planned a genocide, seized the country by unlawful force and illegally detains the democratically elected leaders of Artsakh. The COP29 cannot take place in Baku because Azerbaijan has an habit of using such international events as a means to whitewash the dictatorship and to blackmail democratic countries so they keep their eyes closed on human rights violation if they want to get oil and gas. And the worst thing is that it sometimes works, as exemplified by the treaty signed by the EU in 2022, with the elected local leaders the elected local leaders need to lobby their governments so they do not bow to such blackmailing. And finally, COP29 cannot take place in Baku because apart from governments, there are also NGOs and also local and regional governments who attend COP. And in order to have their voice read on climate change, so how can NGO and local authorities condone the choice of Baku, knowing that independent NGOs are threatened and hit by repression in Azerbaijan? Knowing that there is no elected mayors, no only puppet authorities appointed by the one-party only family system. So, therefore, boycotting COP29 brings sometimes positive in defense of Armenia and Artsakh and for the awareness of public opinion about the real nature of Azerbaijan. So, Azerbaijan did react to our mayor's call for boycott. She put on the list of foreign officials who are persona non grata there. Every time our city council passed a resolution in favor of Artsakh, even when this resolution was aimed at delivering humanitarian aid, the ambassador of Azerbaijan threatened our mayor that Baku would go to court and fight the resolution. The Aliyev regime never dared to do that. It was, of course, just threats. And we did not stop because of those threats, obviously. And just after that decision, we pursued our mission, and the people of Artsakh was made an honorary citizen of Paris in April 2024, and the minister, Artak Beklarian, was awarded the highest distinction of the city, the Médaille Grand Vermeil, on the same day. And very soon we shall vote financial help to NGO, which is now in charge of raising public awareness about the fate of Artsakh and its people, and our mayor still calls for the unconditional and immediate release of all political prisoners from Artsakh who are jailed in Baku. She will raise those issues every time she thinks it's appropriate, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to do this in front of this audience. It was a long answer, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Now I know why you're in elected office. I think Michael mentioned moral clarity. And all of us, in one way or the other, come from the world of politics. And one of the first things that you do is you actually filter out the moral filter, because the practicalities of politics are such that force you to do that. But at the end of the day, anybody who's remembered for anything in this world, if it's good, it's because of moral clarity and not because of practical everyday politics, and I think everybody can attest to that. I'm going to move to a question to Mr. Balian. You have lots and lots of experience with different conflicts. Not every conflict is the same. Not every issue is the same around the world. But here we have, especially through the Carter Center, you guys are active all over the world. What analogies do you see in other times with COP29 where a similar type event that was used in a correct way to achieve positive results? And positive results in this case would mean freeing hostages. And what I mean by freeing prisoners, by the way, people, most prisoners are actually Azeris. There's about more than 300 political prisoners, and about, however you count it, 25 depending on who you believe. So what examples do you have from your work from the time of the Carter Center that are good analogies to this?
Thank you, Eric. Even though I did not understand or hear half of the what you just said, because I forgot my ears at the hotel this morning. My hearing aid. So I'm really having a hard time hearing. Anyway, I think I got the gist of what you said. Look, in any, I'm going to focus on the hostage, the hostages, the prisoners, whatever you want to call them, issue. And in our experience when dealing with hostage issues, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Russia, that we've dealt with, there are three cardinal rules that you be damned if you violate those cardinal rules. Okay, they are: one, do no harm, very simple. Second, establish contact, dialogue with those who have taken the hostages. And third, look for incentives, or I'd like to call bargaining chips, that you can exchange the hostages, your hostages, with whatever it is the opposing side wants. I really hate to say that the Armenian government has violated all three cardinal rules. This is really a sad statement that I make. I wish I did not have to say that here in this audience or anywhere else for that matter. Do no harm is very simple. In any kind of a humanitarian work, the first rule is that you do not do any harm. I'm sure everyone here in this country is aware of this cardinal rule of doing no harm. If they are aware of it, what was the statement that the Prime Minister made? Was it last week? And you commented on it in your commentary on CivilNet, Eric. That who is Vartanian, Rubin Vartanian? Who sent him? What was he doing? Immediately, Azerbaijan picked up on it. See, that's what we've been saying. That's why he's been arrested. Immediately, they picked up on it, and now they got a reason to keep Rubin Vartanian in their jail. At least that's what they think. It's a simple rule. But I'm afraid it's been violated already, and undoing that would be very difficult. The second cardinal rule is to establish dialogue with those who have taken the hostages. We've got 23, I prefer to call them hostages rather than prisoners, POWs, or political prisoners. They're all hostages at this point. And they're taken for a reason by Azerbaijan. To put pressure on Armenia, to revenge, and to complete their efforts on committing genocide against the Artsakh Armenians. The first act of any genocide is to decapitate the leadership of a community targeted for genocide, and that's exactly what Azerbaijan is doing by arresting 8 of the former and current Artsakh leaders. Last year in November, if I'm not mistaken, the Armenian government was obviously in contact with the Azerbaijani government and negotiating a prisoner exchange, and they were able to successfully release 32 Armenian hostages, prisoners held in Baku since for years at that point. In exchange for 2 Armenian prisoners from the 2 Azeri prisoners from the Armenia side. But more importantly, and this is what Azerbaijan wanted, and this is what why Azerbaijan released the 32 Armenian hostages, not because of the 2 Azeri hostages prisoners held in Armenia. That was Armenia's acquiescence for Azerbaijan to hold the COP29. That was the biggest ask from Azerbaijan. I was not in the negotiations, obviously, but I can bet you anything that was the biggest ask from the Azerbaijani side. Why did we not, the Armenian side, why did we not go for an all hostage or prisoner exchange? And in addition, the acquiescence for Azerbaijan to hold the COP29. That's a huge opportunity lost last November or early December, whenever that exchange took place. And frankly, that is inexcusable. The third cardinal rule is to look for incentives for the other side to release your hostages. More crudely, I'd like to say to look for bargaining chips with which then you can secure the freedom of your hostages on the other side. Throughout the last year of imprisonment of the 23 left in Baku, we had very little, if any, information about what the Armenian government was doing to secure the release of these hostages in Baku. Finally, last week, I believe it was the chairman of the National Assembly, the Speaker of the National Assembly, made a statement saying that we're every day working on the hostage, or maybe the Prime Minister, I don't remember who it was. Somebody said from the government that the government is working on the case of the prisoners, but it is not included in the peace negotiations or normalization, as they call it, normalization negotiations with Azerbaijan. But why not? Why? That's the second opportunity lost. Why? Azerbaijan is dying to sign something with Armenia before or during COP29 to justify their Azerbaijan calling the COP29 the COP of peace, right? And the hostage situation is not included in the negotiations? What is the logic? I don't get it. What is the logic of not including there? So what are we left with if the government is not interested in pursuing the release of these hostages? We're left with NGOs working on it, non-governmental organizations, and they're doing a fantastic job. CFTJ is doing a fantastic job. Others here in this country, lawyers, Anouch and others, are doing excellent job in trying to work on the hostage cases, but it is hardly any sufficient. One last point on this. Just last week or earlier this week, Senator, I forget his name, in the U.S., Senator Ben Cardin, who is the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the Senate, made a statement, very strong statement on Azerbaijan and questioning whether or not Azerbaijan is really qualified to hold COP29. You know, other countries that have held the COP in the past, like last year, the UAE, they're not qualified either. But the point is that he's making a very strong statement, and that I'm sure did not come, that statement did not come out of blue sky. Somebody was working on it. Our lobbying organizations, I don't know which one in Washington, has been working on it, and they've secured this statement. I think for a practical next step, the lobbying organizations in Washington have to go immediately to the senator and others to demand that the senator demand the U.S. government to not participate in the COP29, or at the very least reduce the level of their participation, just like Paris is doing. And we should, in Europe, we should work on governments like the French government that has many reasons to boycott Azerbaijan, not to send representatives to the COP29. And for this, time is running out, at least until they release the hostages. And time is running out. We've got 2 months to work on this. We really have to redouble our effort and work much more methodically than we have been so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Hrair. Michael wanted...
not a statement.
Michael wanted to say something, and I'm going to go to a question of the Senator.
Just to spread the blame a little bit, however, part of the reason why Azerbaijan got to COP29 was U.S. desperation in order to give them a concession to bring them, help push them towards Azerbaijan towards the deal. There's a pattern in American diplomacy in which it's a lot easier to try to coerce democracies than it is dictatorships. And perhaps this needs to be put in that context. But what I worry about, look, it would be great if every American official, everyone who went to COP29 either wore T-shirts with Rubin's face on it or went to the prison to try to see prisoners and so forth, took television cameras with them. But what I worry about isn't just COP29, if I can be so blunt. Perhaps COP29 has been what has been restraining Azerbaijan while the international spotlight's on them. The question then happens, what happens, then becomes what happens the next day if Azerbaijan goes on the full military offensive, their image having been laundered. And I don't know how we can dissuade against then that within American political calendar, it doesn't matter who's in the White House, the period between now and January in election years is extraordinarily dangerous because Americans do nothing but navel gaze, and this is the period, unfortunately, it's becoming a perfect storm.
One point, very quick one point, what happens after COP29, Zangezur corridor. I think we're going to see an invasion in the south of Armenia.
Well, we'll go back to that. But I want to go to the Senator. You have a very unique perspective because people think of Azeri lobbying as simply Washington, D.C., Brussels, and frankly, it's far more expensive than that. And using global proxies, sometimes affinity organizations that are Azeri. I want you to tell us a little bit about your experiences. You've been in Sacramento for almost 16, 18 years, so you've seen the whole gamut at all different times and periods. And then put that in the context of what you know about things that are being done around COP29 in California.
First of all, the reason why I'm here is because I have been to Artsakh a number of times and been inspired by my opportunities, the Artsakis that I've met, several of the people who are being held hostage. You know, I've had in my office in Glendale, California, and I've had dinner with them in Artsakh. And so, and I hearken back to my very first trip to the border, where I was in Agdam in the foxhole. And one of the soldiers said to us that day, this is 2016, before the invasion, one of the soldiers said, tragically, we know we're on our own, and we know even our friends aren't our friends. And then his compatriot turned to me and handed me a handful of dirt. It says, this is our land, we're going to stand on our land, we're going to die on our land, and we're going to fight on our land. And I actually took that dirt in my pocket and took it back. It's in my office in California. And so that, knowing in 2016 what was going to happen, for telling it, and still proudly and bravely standing there just is an amazing testament to the Artsakis. And having gone post-44-day war, I'm the only American politician in the country who actually went to Artsakh post-44-day war. And when I came back and I met with the ambassador, and the ambassador said, how did you get in? You know, the fact that the U.S. didn't have a better grasp of what was going on is a tragedy again in and of itself. As far as the Azeris in the state capital in California, every time I take a delegation here, prior to that delegation coming, they lobby my colleagues not to come. They send letters, they come in person, they put pressure on California politicians not to come to Armenia and certainly not to go to Artsakh at the time. When I held the hearing on the Sumgait pogroms, and I had survivors of the pogroms in the state capital, they sent a number of people to that hearing during the public comment period to protest, to say that the pogrom didn't happen, there were not killings, you know, to revise history. It was an orchestrated attempt to use the public forum to tell a revision of history. They had students, they had people of all ages. It was an orchestrated attempt to sugarcoat what happened, the tragedy that happened. This year, on April 24th, Azeri lobbyists were walking the halls of the state capitol, lobbying us against doing our annual genocide recognition, our annual condemnation of what happened, literally on April 24th. When you talk about arrogance and hubris, to pick that day of all day to be working the halls of the state capitol. So rest assured that they are using their oil proceeds to try to affect policies and positions and people to spin a tale in California And if they're doing it in California, they're doing it in other places around the world. And so one of the things I think we can use with COP this year is call them out, obviously, boycott, obviously, point out the hypocrisy of, the environmental impacts of the chemicals used in the war, in what they did in Armenia. There's nothing environmental about their policies or about their efforts and about their use of war to get what they want. And I think we need to call that out. And I think we need to put more pressure on in Washington to follow the good senator's comments that you point out, but there should be not just one, there should be 50 voices. And that's something that we all can do, is as Americans, we can put more pressure on the U.S. government to have a sterner position. And I go back again to that comment that soldier said in 2006 when he said, "We know even our friends aren't our friends." We have to make that not be true. We have to make sure that the friends actually stand up and are friends. And as Eric said, this is the time to have the courage to be known for your conviction, and we all need to speak in unison. So thank you for letting me be here.
Thank you very much, Senator. I have a follow-up comment on what Mr. Rubin and Mr. Balian said. I think aggression next year is frankly greatly determined by our outcomes of the U.S. presidential election and the war in Ukraine. I think a Trump victory will make aggression next year far more likely. I think a Russian victory in Ukraine will make that far more likely. The opposite outcomes will give us the opposite results, and it's not even to pick on President Trump, not that I have a problem doing that, but it's not about his policies. He doesn't really have policies except chaos. And chaos is what dictators look for everywhere. The mayor gave us one approach, and what's the best way to approach COP29? The mayor and her colleagues have decided to boycott. But as a tactical matter, when it comes to COP29, it's an open question for whoever wants to answer. Is it better to make a stink and not go, or to go there and make a scene? Which one is it better course of action? And the reason I say this is because, since the war, since the beginning of the war, on many different levels, I've been involved in public relations war against them. And there's two things. There's a level of functionality of what I call the closed doors. Anything that involves spending money in closed doors, they're very good at. They will get the right journalists and the right PR firm to get into their office to the Wall Street Journal and get something published that normally shouldn't be published. They're very good at that, whether it's the Jerusalem Post or other places. However, once you leave that bought and paid for factor, they can be as dumb as rocks and do stupid things. And totalitarian states, if there's one group of people that totalitarian states are not know how to deal with, is Western environmental activists. They will arrest people, they will handle them in ways they should not. Is it better to have these confrontations, or is it better to have boycott?
Very quickly, and I also want to turn back to your original question after this about where these huge public platforms and events have succeeded in releasing prisoners. I don't know the answer, so I wanted to ask you, but there's also a third way. When I look back at, I think it was the ASEAN Games in the 1980s with South Korea and North Korea, there was a great deal of pressure to jointly host. Why don't, prior to COP29, Armenia make a stink and call on the United States and France to back them up in doing it? Azerbaijan, if you really want peace, why not allow Yerevan to host a few of the meetings and allow open transit across the border? Because if you can leverage it into the precedent of crossing that border, then it's going to have a higher cost on Azerbaijan if they choose again to seal the border. And so, while while my answer would be a combination of boycotts with making a stink, so you can get the best of both actions, I also think that there's that third way in which we can try to put Azerbaijan on the spot, because like you said, sometimes when they're on the spot, they act like buffoons, to highlight that they really have absolutely no interest in peace. All they have an interest in is deflection.
I was just going to say, the challenge with relying on people to know how to make a stink, to make sure that it really is, exposing the inside out. I'm dubious of whether people have the consternation to do that once they're there. And so that's what, to me, it seems more credence on the boycott aspect, because I just don't know, without having it being orchestrated, to truly make it effective inside. But just that's yes.
I mean, frankly, it's a great question, but what I would put forward is, what is the narrative that Azerbaijan wants to get out of this? They're going to show their solar energy. They're going to show non-oil industry energy. They're going to try to show themselves as a country of the 21st century. They're going to try to show themselves as somehow enlightened, secular, tolerant. They're going to trot out the Jews and whatever Christians they have there in a museification of minorities, much in the same way that Recep Tayyip Erdogan does. And then tactically, once you determine ahead of time what their preferred narrative is, then you have to determine how to undercut that narrative one by one so that you can get the press momentum.
I'm not sure they want this COP to be... Do you hear me? I'm not sure they want this COP to be the COP of peace. I think they want to have a good image and say, look, we did an ethnic cleansing, and now the whole world is coming to Baku to celebrate the COP and to act for climate change. So they just want it to be a success event, and they be able to enter to Armenia again. And I agree with the fact that we have to wait for the presidential election in the US and the war in Ukraine. But to answer your question, I think we can do both. Boycott for those who can boycott, and obviously the mayor cannot go and do a scene in Baku. But we also need to have a lot of media going to Baku and doing a lot of articles about several aspects, not only Armenian aspects. I think the world should know that Azerbaijan is not just the state against Armenia and the state who did the ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. They should also know that the human rights here are violated every day, that there is no press rights, etc. So we need to make a lot of articles about the several aspects of the Aliyev regime, and not only about Armenians, to make it the problem of Baku and the Aliyev regime universal and not just only about Armenians, because it's very, narrow speech.
I would also just say, look, there's an opportunity to, and this is something that's more in your bailiwick, Eric, of a fact-check Azerbaijan. Look, I mean, I think you were born in Iran. My introduction to Iran was when, to Armenia was when I lived in Julfa as a student in Iran. And the Iranian, as an American Jew, the Iranians will always trot out, we have the largest Jewish minority in the Middle East after Israel. But when you actually fact-check them, they're using statistics which are 25 years old, and the reality is it's a shell of its former numbers. The same thing is true when it comes to the Jews, for example, in Azerbaijan. It's one thing to say that we have 30,000 Jews in Azerbaijan or whatever the number is. It's another thing to point out, that's the number you used in the year 1995. Are you saying that there's been absolutely no change since? Where are you getting, I mean, never trust data from dictators. We have the ability to fact check Azerbaijan on this, and it should be a running fact check on any number of platforms.
You use the phrase museification, which I think is a brilliant phrase. Because
to be fair, it comes from Aykan Cindemir, a former Turkish parliamentarian who's now at the ADL.
Whenever you cannot give credit to other people, don't. Just take it for yourself. And I know why it's brilliant, because frankly, that was That was the Azeri plan for Artsakh before the ethnic cleansing, because they actually wanted 2,000-3,000 people to stay, so you can have this museum of the 80-year-old lady that can be paid to come and say things. And they didn't want total ethnic cleansing. They wanted ethnic cleansing, but they wanted that museum to still be there, and they don't have the museum. We had a lot of questions from the audience, and I'm going to move to that. And part of it is talking about the corporate aspects of this. COP is not simply a governmental action. It's actually, there's a lot of corporate interest there, whether it's fossil fuels, renewables. There's a lot of activities of that nature. And then there's specifically, obviously, in the last panel about the British role in getting some of the most unseemly contracts in ethnically cleansed places. In many ways, in the modern context, corporations are actually more easy to move than the governments are, because they have a bottom line and they have image issues. In fact, nowadays, corporations they actually will give you what their image is worth. If you want to understand this, this is what led Shell to actually get out of Russia, because the money that they were making there was not worth their reputation, risk of their logo, which is worth like $40 billion. So what is it from the corporate aspect that can be weaponized for the outcomes and not just use the traditional political one?
So I'm going to broaden corporate to pension funds, to the money market, to the big picture investments. One of the frustrations I've had in Sacramento is when we've tried to encourage divestment from Turkey, divestment from Azerbaijan, the money market people, the fiduciaries say, well, we only have a fiduciary responsibility to have the greatest return, and that human rights and civil rights and atrocities have no merit and no standing when they're making those financial decisions. And I think that's something we can all work towards, is to try to make our investors have a social conscience and not just look at the bottom line. And I think that we have to change the culture of the fiduciary investment mindset, which is only interested in the bottom line. And I think that's something that we can do as a people, is to say there's got to be some social responsibility, whether it's in the corporate side or whether it's in the big investment side. Because I think most people don't want their pensions being invested in places that are oppressive. And I always come back to, again, in my district, where if you look at the city employees, the school employees in the city of Glendale, a significant percentage of those employees are Armenian Americans who then have their pension funds invested in places who are hostile to Armenians. That's criminal on top of just crummy. And so I think we can do, that's something where we can sort of collectively try to influence the corporate responsibility.
I'm just going to repeat what the senator just said. We need to start thinking and acting on a BDS project, boycott, divest, and sanctions. But it has to be really strategically designed and targeted campaign, not just among Armenians, but among all who think justice must be done. And so long as justice is not done to Artsakh and to the prisoners, I think a BDS campaign is long overdue in our case.
Just to square the two circles. I mean, I found what the senator said to be fascinating. My background is more in defense, and the way in which I'm often introduced to these subjects is when it comes to United States unilateral sanctions, which of course the Europeans and other countries complain about, the Helms-Burton Act, the Iran-Libya Sanctions Act, and so forth. But what we find is when the Europeans, for example, the Germans in the past, would urge their companies not to abide by U.S. unilateral sanctions, sanctions, the response when I would talk to companies, whether it was Siemens, whether in the French case Total, would be our responsibility is to our shareholders. Therefore, while our diplomats are telling us we shouldn't abide by whatever Congress is saying, the fact of the matter is our shareholders just want us to make money and they don't want us to get into a legal morass inside the United States, and therefore our reputational risk has to be a prominent factor. And so it is possible, without even addressing the formal tightening of everything, to achieve what the senator is saying.
If I could jump in real quick, a success story on that effort is Armenian students at the University of California who pressured the University of California to divest from Turkey. That was driven by students demanding that the university not invest, and they were successful in winning that argument. But it took, it took a lot.
We have about 10 minutes. I'm going to put something out there. I'm going to let everyone have their final say. I think I'm all about practicalities in politics. And one of the 800-pound gorilla in the room is actually Russia. And why do I say that? Few know or care about what Azerbaijan is or has done, but now, frankly, in the context of Armenia and in many other places, Baku and Moscow are the same. And there's a lot more people who care about or despise Russia than even know or care about Azerbaijan. And this is something where it's not simply the regime's crimes, but the regime's crimes at this point, which involve laundering Russian gas, laundering Russian oil, and we know that. These are factual things. These are not, in fact, the biggest laundering is actually not done through Azerbaijan. It's done through SOCARs in the refineries in Turkey, because the way international business models work, it's whoever, essentially, if you combine 1% of something with 99%, it becomes a dual-use, dual product, so you're not subject to the same sanctions. So I think in all of our discourse and dialogue, the two have to be married. There has been, hundreds of billions of dollars spent in properly demonizing Russia, and we can actually take a free ride by making the connect with a country that is a legal, strategic partner of Russia. Let's not forget that. This was signed 2 days before the invasion of Ukraine. And no matter what we think for the Armenians are here, this is small fry in the context of the world compared to Ukraine. So I want to go through all of our distinguished guests and give you a minute or two to say your final statement. We'll start with you, Madam Mayor.
Just to end, I think and I hope that the decision from the mayor to boycott the COP29 can make an example, and maybe for other elected officials in the world to say we will boycott as well. And for the ones who are going to Baku, let's try to make our medias from all over the world have a bad article reputation in Azerbaijan. And at the end of the day, if the COP29 is not a success for Azerbaijan image, I think that we will all win, and hopefully they will not invade Armenia after that.
Well, I think the one thing that we know is when it comes to authoritarian leaders, I mean, I think what Trump was talking about, he won the debate 93-6. So he will claim victory no matter what happens. So I don't know if we'll get him to admit that it was a failure. But we'll move on. Mr. Rubin, your final statement?
What I would say here is, within the United States at least, one of the biggest weaknesses of the Armenian community is the tendency to spend more time attacking each other than achieving a consensus goal. And we can put the blame game for that aside. I mean, there's no angels here. What I would argue is, if there can be one positive outcome of COP29, it would be a test case for burying the hatchet among various groups and really focusing on the strategies which you've put out on CivilNet, which we've discussed here, to try to maximize the advantage for those who care about freedom, religious freedom, justice, liberty, democracy, to use COP29 as an inflection point, rather than simply have it be one more self-bought trophy on Aliyev's shaky case.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. Mr. Balian?
Fully agree with Michael in terms of creating a unified front among the Armenians in general and the Armenian lobbies in particular for the period, the immediate period ahead until COP29. And in this context, we've got, in the US at least, we've got 55 days or 54 days, I forget whatever number, to the presidential elections. And we really have to redouble our efforts, and a united effort, hopefully, in pushing the two candidates to face reality and make, at least at this point, make promises that really will convince the Armenian community, Armenian voters in the US, to vote for them in the presidential elections. I think this is a window of opportunity we have that we can use, not just screaming and yelling different things and cussing about this official or that official not doing his job or her job in the US, but really strategically targeting what it is that we want and pushing the candidates to at least promise to fulfill those demands if they are elected. We need really to redouble our effort in the next couple months, and in addition, redouble our efforts in convincing governments to reduce their representation, at the very least, reduce their representation at COP29, if not boycott.
Thank you, Senator, we're going to close for comments, and I'll have the final word, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. And I want to go back to something a number of you, and I think, Michael, you were talking about chaos and this time between now and January being very dangerous, and I agree 100%. I think we have to be guarded, and I do think when we're looking at the U.S. presidential election, chaos is not a good thing. The world wants predictability, wants stability, wants to know what people are thinking, what they believe in, and I think, Hrair, what you were saying about forcing the candidates to have their opinions out there, press them. How are you going to handle this? What are you going to do? What didn't you do in the past? We need to get them on record. So we can hold them accountable. I've endorsed Vice President Harris. That's my choice in the upcoming election, and I think if you watch the debate the other night, you see the difference between stability and chaos. That's my opinion, so I'm, offering my opinion. The other thing, again, you talked about the community not being united. I represent 150,000 Armenian Americans in my district, and oftentimes I'll get yelled at for who I'm in a photo with. And my message is stop caring about who's in a photo and work together to have a united voice to articulate all of the things that have been said today. So thank you.
Just one more point, Eric. I forgot to make. Our lobbying effort has to extend also to our government here in Armenia to take up their responsibility and speak for the hostages in Baku.
I want to thank our very wonderful, distinguished panel. I want to thank every single one of you for your participation and your insightful points. I want to thank a person who's not here, and why do I want to thank her? The job that organizations like CFTJ and many others who fight for justice around the world do is incredible. I'm always reminded of when I was a young, foolish activist. One of my mentors would always say when I would come up with a brilliant plan is, don't forget, the world will almost always pick Barabbas. And anybody who does, that's a biblical reference, when they had a choice between Jesus and Barabbas, the crowd wanted Barabbas. So you're essentially always going against the grain, and you're doing something that isn't easy. And anybody who does this kind of work really deserves our appreciation. So thank you, Cassia, and CFTJ.
We're not able to do this earlier. We intended to do this earlier, but I have the honor and privilege to be elected the board member of an organization that consists of majority of women. Center for Truth and Justice, men are the very, very, very minority. So it's not easy. But Center for Truth and Justice is really proud of the women we work with around the world, and we have noticed that the fact in the human rights world, there are so many wonderful, wonderful women, much more than men. I'm not sure why that is the case, but we are very much dedicated to promoting that and recognizing those courageous, hardworking leaders who happen to be female. And one of those is sitting here with us today. I want to recognize Ms. Anouch Toranian, who is a very recognized attorney, whether she's sitting on a bench as an ad hoc judge, whether she's founding or presiding over NGOs, collaborating with other attorneys to do it, to do a lot of good work. She's one of the very few litigating attorneys who's litigating international cases following the 44-day war, the 2023 events, and fighting for the rights of the POWs, people who lost so much, and she's doing it relentlessly. I know she's engaged in multiple talks with other attorneys and trying to do everything she could do day in, day out, and we see it, we recognize it, we want to see more like you. So thank you very much, thank you for your dedication to the cause, and this is truly deserved.
Of course, I wish to convey my deepest gratitude for appreciating the efforts which we do. And this is a powerful source for the motivation. But I'm also thankful to people who support our efforts behind the scenes, and those whose exemplary actions continue to motivate our unwavering commitment for the protection of the rights of Armenians. Thank you so much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, with this we are coming to the end of this journey that we have done these 3 days of discussions in different aspects, discussing the standing, where actually the Republic of Armenia stands in international proceedings, what is the situation with the relationship with International Criminal Court, what is the, our distinguished guests shared also their experience about different jurisdictions, victims' perspective, also the situation with media and also the political situation. So we have very intense discussions these 3 days, and maybe one of the main finding that was also of this whole conference is that we as Armenians and actually all the NGOs and the Armenian government has actually a lot to do. And as Mr. Balian correctly mentioned, we really need to redouble our efforts in using all these paths for accountability and for the human rights. So at this moment, I want also to thank the organizers for giving us the floor, coming here with our distinguished guests to Armenia, to Yerevan, to very historical and very symbolical place for international law and international criminal law for human rights. So with this, thank you to Judge Abkaryan and also Gorman Atsakanyan, who is also the president of the Center for Truth and Justice. Of course, thank you, distinguished guests, that you, considering your busy schedule, you traveled to Armenia and to speak, to share your experience. Thank you for being with us today and these 3 days. Also, thanks to the whole staff of the Center for Truth and Justice for organizing and taking care of us during these intensive days. And I can imagine how much effort you put, such as Arshak and Anahit, who really put everything that we have here, a comfortable situation. And of course to the moderators that moderated very well the whole panels and of the conference. And of course the volunteers, without help we would never manage to have this wonderful conference. So thank you all, thank you very much for everything. And now the last words to the President, please.
Thank you, and thank you everyone. There's hardly anything to add other than recognize the superstar, co-chair of the conference committee, Gugen Petrosyan, who has done so much for the cause. And really, everybody loves you for a reason, and he's a very hard-working, very talented, and very humble man. Also, Talin Hittik, who's not here, she's also co-chairing this year's conference, and she's done a tremendous work, and she's working right now, doing her part. Gugen, thank you. Talin, thank you, everybody. Thank you very much. And last but not least, I want to ask, if I may, to call Archun Topchan and Gane Agajanian. No? Sorry. To board members, CFTJ. The rest could have been present. Maybe please stand up or at least approach. They work so very hard, pro bono, like everybody else, and it's an honor to really be able to do this and do this every time. So thank you very much. Let's make sure the next conference is also a success.